The office that Dr. Ethan Marsh occupied on Meridian Outpost had been assigned to him 6 years ago with the implicit understanding that he would tidy it eventually. An understanding that had proven, over time, to be optimistic. Research papers occupied every horizontal surface in the particular stratigraphy of a person who knows exactly where everything is and would be genuinely lost in a clean room. The single window looked out onto the gas giant below. A slow, enormous amber presence that Ethan had long since stopped seeing and started using as a thinking aid, the way other people used blank walls or closed eyes. He was not thinking about anything in particular when Seraphine opened his door. She did not knock. She never knocked, which he had initially found presumptuous and had long since reclassified as efficient. She was Velari, which meant she moved with the deliberate economy of a species that did not waste motion, and her ears, long, tapered, curving to elegant points through the dark fall of her hair, caught the light from the corridor behind her as she stepped inside and closed the door with the care of someone who wants the conversation that follows to be private. He had known her for 8 months. They had collaborated on 2 research papers. She had told him during the second one that his citation methodology was sloppy, and she had been correct, and he had respected her more for it than for anything else. She looked at him across the accumulated archaeology of his desk, and said, in the measured, precise English that her translator produced like an instrument hitting its cleanest note, "I would like to ask you something, and I would like you to hear it completely before you respond." "All right," he said, "I would like you to marry me." The gas giant continued its slow rotation outside the window. Somewhere in the corridor, a door opened and closed. Ethan became aware that he was still holding his pen, that he had no memory of picking it up, and that he had absolutely nothing useful to do with it. He put it down. He picked it up. He put it down again. Seraphine waited with the patience of someone who had expected exactly this and had budgeted time for it. He said, "I would like to understand." She said, "I know, that is why I came to you." She did not explain everything that evening. She explained the shape of it, enough for him to see the structure beneath the request, and left him with it the way you leave someone with a complex piece of equipment, confident they will work out the mechanism if given sufficient time and sufficient reason to try. He worked it out over the following 3 days, partly through what she told him in increments, and partly through 6 years of xenosociological research that had apparently been building toward a moment of devastating personal relevance. The Velari bond was not, he knew academically, a romantic institution. It was civic architecture, a recognized partnership that granted both parties standing, voice, and legal personhood within Velari social infrastructure. You were counted because you were bonded. You participated because you were counted. The system was, from a purely structural perspective, elegant. From the perspective of someone whose bond had just been severed, it was a locked door with no handle on the inside. Seraphine's partner, a Velari research coordinator named Aviath, whom Ethan had met twice and found professionally courteous and personally opaque, had dissolved the bond 6 weeks ago. The stated reason, she told him on the second day, sitting across from him in the outpost's small common area with her hands around a cup of something warm, and her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone describing an injury they have already decided not to perform pain about, was cultural drift. She had spent too long working within human frameworks. Her methodologies had diverged. She was no longer, in Aviath's assessment, a compatible civic partner. It had happened quietly. No ceremony, no formal hearing, one filing, one confirmation. One morning she woke up and the record that said she counted had been updated to say she didn't. "The human administrative system," she continued, "does not recognize my Velari research credentials without institutional endorsement from a Velari authority, which I can no longer obtain without standing, which I cannot have without a bond." She looked at him. "You study these structures." "I do," he said. "Then you understand what I am describing." He did. He had written 80 pages about exactly this category of bureaucratic exclusion. He had used phrases like systemic gap and infrastructural invisibility. He had not, at the time of writing, imagined sitting across from someone living inside one. "Why me?" he asked. She considered the question with the seriousness she applied to all questions. "Because you are the only person on this station," she said, "who has consistently treated my conclusions as worth arguing with." He thought about this, That's your criterion for a husband. It is, she said, my criterion for a partner. The paperwork described it as a recognized civil partnership under Interspecies Accord Regulation 7, which was accurate, and took 11 days to process, which was faster than Ethan had expected, and which he suspected had something to do with Seraphine submitting the application with the same thorough, preemptive documentation she brought to everything. She had anticipated 3 of the 5 administrative queries before they were raised. He found the draft responses already written on his shared terminal one morning and experienced the specific feeling of a person realizing they have underestimated the situation they are in. They established rules on a Tuesday evening, sitting at his desk, because her lab was too organized for a conversation that involved any uncertainty. Shared professional decisions, mutual consultation before any institutional commitment, absolute honesty, including and especially about the arrangement itself. They were not, they agreed, performing a marriage. They were building a structure. Structures required maintenance and clarity and the willingness to flag problems before they became load-bearing failures. Ethan had written that last part down because it sounded like something he would forget, and also because he was a person who processed things better when they were written. Seraphine had read it, said nothing, and moved on to the next point, which was how they would handle the outpost's social assumptions about the nature of their partnership. The answer they arrived at was, with patient consistency, they would not explain unless asked. They would not perform unless comfortable. They would be what they had agreed to be, which was partners, and allow other people to interpret that word however they chose. What neither of them included in the rules, because neither of them had thought to account for it, was what to do about the coffee. It had started simply. Ethan ordered his coffee specially, not the Outpost's standard issue, which tasted of good intentions and mineral recycling, but a particular blend from a small supplier on Kepler Station that he'd been ordering for 4 years out of stubbornness and genuine need. He had, one morning, made too much. He had left the remainder outside her lab in a spare cup because throwing it away felt wrong and knocking felt like an interruption. When he passed her lab 3 hours later, the cup was gone. He said nothing. She said nothing. He left coffee outside her door the following morning on purpose, and the morning after that, and every morning for the next 3 weeks. She never mentioned it. She never didn't drink it. He recognized, in the middle of something that was not what he had agreed to, and he was finding it very difficult to identify the moment it had changed. Seraphine, for her part, had begun correcting his field notes again, not the formal research documents, which she had always reviewed at his request, but the informal daily logs he kept for his own reference, which he had never shown anyone. He had come back to his terminal one evening to find 3 annotations in her notation style, precise and unsentimental, each one identifying something he had observed correctly and interpreted sideways. He had read them twice. He had incorporated all 3 into the formal record. He had not asked how she had accessed the file because he was not sure he wanted to have that conversation yet. The current between them, low and unacknowledged, continued to run. The confirmation arrived on a Thursday, which Ethan had begun to think of as the most consequential day of the week. The Valari Continuance Council, notified of the civil partnership under the terms of the Interspecies Recognition Clause. A clause that Seraphine had, Ethan suspected, known about before she knocked on his door, and had simply allowed him to discover at his own pace, was required to restore her provisional standing as a matter of interspecies treaty compliance. The filing was 3 pages. The language was dense and bureaucratic and entirely without warmth. Her standing was restored. She existed again, officially, in the record that mattered. She read the confirmation on his terminal and was quiet for a long time. Outside, the gas giant turned in its slow, enormous way, amber and indifferent and very large. Ethan watched her read and thought about 8 months of collaboration and 2 research papers and a door that had opened without a knock, and then thought about coffee cups and field note annotations and the specific quality of silence that had developed between them. Not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people saying something without using words, which is a different thing entirely. The reason for the arrangement has been resolved, he said, not an accusation. A question without a question mark. She looked at him. The translator pulsed at her jaw. Yes, she said. So. He chose the next word carefully, the way you choose a step on uncertain ground. What happens now? She was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to have a character of its own. Then she said, I have been studying human partnership frameworks for 6 years. Every cultural model I have reviewed makes the same distinction. She paused. The chosen bond, the one entered without obligation, without the requirement of birth or law or social architecture, is considered the most significant, because it is chosen, because it is renewed implicitly every day by the decision to continue. Ethan waited. I would like, she said, to continue. He looked at the gas giant, he looked at her. He thought about a rule they had written on a Tuesday evening, absolute honesty, including and especially about the arrangement itself, and decided that the honest thing was also, in this case, the true thing. So would I, he said. She nodded once, with the composure of someone who had calculated a probable outcome and found the actual one satisfactory. Then she looked at his desk, where a cold cup of the good coffee sat next to a